Hello, everyone. Welcome to those who haven't been here before. Welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Ilya Langley, and it's 2025, and here is the books I read in January 2025. Before I even get into everything, look at me. If everything goes right, look at me posting this video the last day of the month. Usually I don't post videos like this until like the first week of the next month at the earliest, sometimes later. But I finished my last book of the month earlier today. I had a couple more pages to finish, so I finished that earlier today, and I can bring you this video now. So I'm happy about that. Go me. I read 7 books in January. I didn't plan on reading 7 books. I never really plan anything. Like, I guess anyone new here, in terms of my reading, if people recommend things to me, then I'll pick them up and read them. Sometimes I have books on the shelf for a while. I read them. I also have a book club I'm a part of, and I'll read books there. But a lot of the books I read, I just like get from my library, and so it's kind of like, oh, my hold's finally ready. I can finally read it, so then I just pick up and read it. Like, I don't have a schedule. But I remember as the month started, I was kind of like, oh, it's award season time. I have some other movies I want to see, some new TV shows, things like coming out. So I was like, I want to like spend more time, maybe doing some more of that, even though I do watch a lot of movies and TV shows still. But it just ended up happening. Again, like I said, the library is where I primarily get my books, and some of these holds were finally coming to me, and I just was going off and reading. Some of the books were shorter, so that also made it easier as well, but we'll get into that, I guess, now. So let's jump to my first book of the year, which I'm like disappointed, even before I say that this is my first book of the year. This was a book, you want me to say the book title? The book is called A Court of Rose and Thorns by Sarah J. Maas, or Moss, it's 2 A's, her surname. This is a book, if any of you guys have been like on Book Talk, you might have heard this book. People refer to this book as ACOTAR. It's a series. This is the first book of the series. So I'd heard about this book over and over and over again. People talking about ACOTAR, all these things. And I was just like, okay, let me just pick up and read it. Like, I was on a flight home on New Year's Day, and I said, okay, let me start reading. Did I ever start that book then? Maybe I started the next day. I don't remember. I think I started it that day though. So I was like, I just knew I was going to read it. Like, I had it on hold. It was one of those I had to wait a while to get the hold. It was such a popular book, obviously. But it's not the vibe for me at all. So I didn't even know what, again, I had no idea what it was about. I knew it was like covering like adult subjects and things. I think that's probably why it was so popular in Book Talk, but I didn't know it was a fantasy type book. If I would have known it was a fantasy type novel, I'm not really into that. I probably wouldn't have never picked it up, but I have like a kind of rule I have with myself that if I pick a book up, I will finish it. This book, sometimes I have books like I don't enjoy, and I'm like trudging through, and that's very much what this book was. So it was just not my vibe. I gave it a 2 out of 5, which I think was generous. Even when I was like pulling up my ratings for everything, I was kind of like, oh, this, thinking back to when I read this book, I was like, this seems like a generous 2 out of 5 that I gave, but I don't know. I mean, there were some parts of it I could see that were okay. I could see why some people would like this book, but just not my type of thing. So if I don't plan on reading the rest of the series, this was enough for me. But that's the first book of the year, so kind of disappointing. At least it's like, this is the first book of 2025, when if I ever send my book list to anyone, this is going to be the book. And it's just like, ooh, whew, not the vibe. But anyways, moving on to the next book. The next book was a good one, very good one. It's called Misfits, A Personal Manifesto by Michaela Cole. That's my second book of January 2025. Michaela Cole is somebody who I first was introduced to her essentially in her hit series, I May Destroy You, which came out in 2020. Multiple awards she won. Such an excellent show. But before then, remember, after I was watching I May Destroy You, I found out she had another show called Chewing Gum that I started watching right when I basically started picking up this book. It's a very quick series. It only has 2 seasons, I believe, like 6 episodes a season, 20-some minute show, so really quick to kind of get through. So I picked that up, or I picked this book up, I don't know which one, but I basically finished Chewing Gum in a couple weeks, essentially, and read this book, which is kind of like, I don't know, it's like her manifesto, and kind of like reminding people how good it is to be a misfit, actually, and like how there's sometimes the most creative people are misfits. I remember in my review I put how Here to the Crazy Runs Here's to the crazy ones, which is a quote from an Apple commercial that Steve Jobs narrated in 1997. It's one of my favorite quotes. I actually have it quoted up on the top of my computer screen. Let me just read the quote to you. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They are not fond of rules. They have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify them, vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. That's a quote that I've always really liked, and that kind of, not saying that she didn't even mention that quote in her book, but I was just thinking about the whole terms of misfits, and she was very much talking about how as she was going through her experiences coming up in this industry, she also, I should say, those two shows I mentioned, Chewing Gum and I May Show You, she wrote those as well, starring in them. So she was very much in this industry and trying to find her footing, kind of being a different person, being in rooms where she's kind of a person who's like her, which I feel is pretty common for a lot of Black people in spaces like this especially. So talking about them, kind of giving people tips for how to just push through and kind of stay to your true self, essentially. I think it's a really great book. Obviously, someone who's been so successful in navigating these spaces, has had successful TV shows and just a successful career so far. And she has so much more to come. So this was a really good book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's really one of those short ones. You could finish it pretty quickly. I forgot how many. It took me it wasn't very long that I had to read this book. It was one of those kind of quick ones, a little over 100 pages. So a breeze, really. But a really good book. The next book I actually have here is called Forest of Noise, Poems by Mossab Abatoa. This book is another short book, a little under 100 pages. It's poetry, so it's typical with poetry, it's a bunch of, you could, if you really wanted to, you could completely read this book in an hour or two. But a lot of times with poetry, especially poetry like this, it's something you really need to sit with and digest. And this was no exception. I'm not a huge poetry reader, but this book in particular, my sister let me borrow this copy. It's from Mossab Abatoa, is a Palestinian man, and this is his second work of poetry. I look forward to reading his first work. I have it on hold at my library again. Hopefully I get it soon. I might even end up buying the book because this was so excellent. And this book is, before I even go into everything, I want to just read how the book starts. This isn't even the first poem, but this is just how the book, I'm flipping the pages if you're hearing the pages. This is just on the first one of the first pages, but right before we get into the poetry, or right before we get into the titles of the poems and everything. He has this written down. Every child in Gaza is me. Every mother and father is me. Every house is my heart. Every tree is my leg. Every plant is my arm. Every flower is my eye. Every hole in the earth is my wound. And as I'm going through the book and going through the different poems, I often was referring back to this page, or just kind of remembering this page and what he said, and kind of this immediately kind of connects you to this deep feeling that he has that's so clearly expressed throughout the book, as we're reading of the destruction of his home and his people. So even one of the quotes, this is from one of the first poem in here, which is called Younger Than War. One of the quotes in here, kind of again with the whole introducing of what this book is about and what it's going to be kind of covering, this book of poetry. No need for radio, we are the news. So he is writing of the onslaught of bombardments and violence of his people and his home of Gaza, from the opening poem, which that quote is from, Younger Than War, like I said, and how the beginning paragraph comes that I just read to you. We are immediately kind of grabbed with this long history of violence and reminded to pay attention to this long history of violence and that crosses generations, and bringing new ones into the bloodshed. And this is a quote from someone else's review on Song Goodreads that was just so great. I just directly quoted from it on mine. It says, "It is the bloodshed that is felt on every page of this harrowing collection. as rubble and bodies are strew across the stanzas to focus our gaze directly into the horrors. Haunting, horrific, yet gorgeously captured and expressed. So he uses his voice and his gift of words with this poetry to speak to and to speak for, or to speak for rather, the millions of people who have gone through this experience, and of seeing their homeland basically being bombarded, essentially, of this violence. And like I said, a collection is heartbreaking to read. It's one of those I was often reading. I get a couple poems, and then I'd have to just put it down, and I'd come back to it a couple of days later. Actually, when I started reading this, I picked up, I believe, my next book as I was reading this or something. I just needed like the way to kind of break it up a little bit. It's not one you want to rush through. It's one of those you want to really digest. But it's such an excellent read. It's such an important read. I've always said I think we need to hear more and more from Palestinian voices. So I know, at least myself, I'm eager to continue to search more of people's voices, whether it be in books, whether it be in films, all types of things that really kind of show. I will say, actually, speaking of Palestinian voices in films, I saw this excellent film called From Ground Zero. It's a collection of, I believe, 22 short films that is kind of like documenting like what it's like in terms of like being in the war there. And some of it's like animated stuff, some of it's like all different types of styles of films. Excellent. Again, 22 short films all kind of collected into one. From Ground Zero. It's so good. Go see that one. I made a 1-minute movie review on that one. If you'd like to see it, I can tag it below. But yeah, Force the Noise. Excellent. I'm gonna pick up his other book of poetry as well, which is his first. This is his second one, but he has the first one as well. I never gave my rating. Maybe I would have inserted it in here before then. Before I say this out loud now, but I gave it a 5 out of 5. This is my only 5 out of 5 of the month, actually. But yeah, excellent book of poetry. All right, my next book, what book is this? Book number 4 of January 2025 is Conclave by Robert Harris. Conclave, the film, was one of my favorite films of 2024. I've talked about this a couple times. I've done a 1-minute movie review on it. I've made a video talking about my favorite films of 2024. If you'd like to see some of those, then like I said, I can link them below. But I was, after finding out that the film was adapted from a book, which a lot of great films are, I was like, oh, I need to read this book. Conclave is, I should say, I gave the film too, actually, a 4.5 out of 5. And even though I knew the story from seeing the film, I've seen the film twice now. Even though I knew what was going to happen, I knew like when the certain plot points would come up or certain like little twist, I was still like reading and turning the pages like, oh my gosh, like I'm virtually with my Kindle, but I was kind of like, or my iPad rather, but I was like waiting. I was like, even though I know what's coming next, I was like, how are they going to reveal it? How is maybe the wording going to be different than how it was in the film? Certain bits that were really like interesting to kind of like see how things were going. And another big thing in terms of Conclave that was so interesting to me, seeing the film and also reading this book, I knew nothing of like the Roman Catholic Church. The only thing I knew was there's a pope, usually a white guy who's in white all the time. He lives in the Vatican. There's a Sistine Chapel, which is beautiful. But other than that, I didn't know anything about, and I still don't know anything about the Roman Catholic Church really like that, especially not how they chose popes. So kind of hearing of like what a conclave is, which a conclave is a private meeting, and specifically in the Roman Catholic Church, it's a private meeting between the cardinals to elect the pope. So you're sequestered in this place in the Sistine Chapel, and all the cardinals from all around the world have to vote and have a majority to vote for the next pope. And this book is basically detailing this conclave where they're electing a pope, and there's certain dramas. People betray each other. There's people who are ambitious to want to get the job, some people who don't want to get the job. The main character of the book is Cardinal Lawrence, who is like the dean of the College of Cardinals, but also he's the overseer of the conclave. He's responsible to make sure everything goes well and all these things. So it's just a really great book. It was really like like I said, even though it was one where I knew what was coming because I had seen the film and it's one of my favorites of the year, it was still like, oh, this is really great. And I was just like flipping through, and also made me want to watch the film again. So definitely a really great book. 4.5 out of 5. strong recommendation for me. Both the book and the film. Definitely keep thinking about the film. Definitely read Conclave. All right, book, what is it, 6? No, book 5 of 2025. Lord. Book 5 of January 2025 is actually a reread. It is Year of Yes, How to Dance It Out, Stand in the Sun, and Be Your Own Person by Shonda Rhimes. This book was a book pick for our book club. Great way to start the year, I think. When I read this for the first time, I read this in January 2017, and I was trying to go back to figure out when I had first read this, but then I typed something in my notes app to see if I had any quotes or anything I'd saved, and it said I had saved something from January 2017. I said, okay, so I probably read this book around then. My sister had lent me her copy, and I have since got my own copy. This book is like I said, it was a good book to start the year with for the book club, but also just in general, it's a good kind of charge or good kind of reminder. Shonda Rhimes, if you don't know her, she is the famous, the great TV writer and movies as well. Princess Diaries 2. A lot of people don't know she wrote that. She did write Princess Diaries 2. Fabulous. But Shonda Rhimes is the great writer, producer, creator of shows, all these things, of shows like Grey's Anatomy, one of my favorites, Scandal, another one of my favorites. She produced How to Get Away with Murder. She owned TV on ABC for several years with Shondaland. It was a Thursday night thing. I remember back in college, all my friends knew, even if they weren't watching the show or whatever, they knew I was unavailable to hang out on Thursdays, because Thursdays were Shondaland night, and I had Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder back to back to back. So don't bother me. But she has those shows like Private Practice. She does Bridgerton for Shondaland. She actually wrote Queen Charlotte, the Bridgerton spinoff. So many things that she has done under the Shondaland helm, and either things she's written or things she's produced, whatever it is. She's an excellent writer and everything else. So this book was published originally in 2015, so we're coming up on the 10 year of it. It was published in November, so it's been 9 years, but it'll be 10 years at the end of the year. And I think at this stage in her life, she had a quest to basically go on a year of yes. It kind of started out with they were getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner with her sister and some people, and her sister said to her, she was talking about all these things she'd been inviting to and all these opportunities she had, and her sister just said to her, "You never say yes to anything." And that shook Shonda basically to kind of start a reflection of saying, why don't I say yes to anything? Or why am I so, she's right. I would have probably said no to these things. What is it about me that I'm so, she's a very, very introverted person, very just or at least was, I'm not sure how, obviously this is 10 years on, but that basically woke her up to start saying, let me start saying yes to some things, and not some things, to everything essentially, to get out of my shell, to stop being scared of things, say yes to changing my body in terms of being more healthy, say yes to opportunities, say yes to what I want in myself, saying yes to no, which if you read this book, it's chapter 11, saying yes to no, I think that's one of the best chapters in here, because just because you say yes doesn't mean you can't say no, because you could say yes to no. I gave this book a 4 out of 5, which is the same rating I gave it. At least I think I would have gave it. I wasn't using Goodreads at that time, but I gave this book a 4 out of 5. And I remember I was thinking about it when I read this book. I think this book came at a good time to reread it, because when I read it in 2017, I was still in school. I was still in university. I was 20 years old. I had obviously had a life experience up to that point, but I think at this point now, reading it 8 years later, being 28 now, being more of an adult person, or being being an adult person, completely, being an adult woman here is I don't know. You've gone through more, obviously, in the 8 years I've read it. If I were to read the same book 8 years from now, I'm sure I would have even more things I would take from it or understand more, and all these different things. So it was one of those books to kind of give me a good reminder of kind of saying yes to things, saying yes to myself. I'm more of an extroverted type of person, but even just, again, all the things she talked about, saying yes to the things she truly wanted. She ended a relationship where she was they wanted to get married, and she didn't really want to, but she like agreed to do. But she like said yes to herself and saying like, this is not what I want. I need to be open for what I actually want. Saying yes to like being a healthier person. Like I said, saying yes to no, all types of things that really just made her such a more happy person and a more joyful person. If I can find it, there's this quote towards the end of the book where she thanks her sister. Her sister's name is Dolores. At least this is one of her sisters. The one who said to her, "You always say no to everything." Or like you never say yes, whatever it was. And let me find the quote here. Okay, I found it. This is on page 296 for anyone who has the book. Again, she told her sister Dolores that she's so happy that she said this to her, and this is what her sister said back to her, which I really liked. "I'm extremely proud of you," she said quietly. "You were joyless. All you ever did was sleep. Literally and metaphorically, you were asleep. I was worried. Life is short. Yours seemed really, really short. And now you have completely transformed. You're alive. You're living. Some people never do that." So I think with this whole book, again, a great book to start the year. It's one of those books you could still read at any time and really get something out of it. And I think you see how Shonda is able to have changed her life. I think it's possible for anyone to change their life if they, at least in certain ways, if they want to. And something even like this, something as simple as saying yes to something, saying yes to yourself, being more authentically yourself, going after what you want. I think it's really great, and it can really bring you more happiness, more joy, all the things. So really great book, really strong recommendation for me. Also, it was a great gift to give to people, or like it's a great book to lend out to people. So I encourage you to do that if you happen to have a copy, or if you want to read it. Definitely share the message. All right, getting towards the end here, book 6 of January 2025, or of 2025 in general. This is another book of poetry. It's called Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. This was a book I had seen, I'd heard this title of this book a lot, or I'd seen people quote poems from this book and kind of just like posting them online and seeing little bits and bobs now and then. I just said, okay, it's a quick book to read. Let me see how many pages it was. It was like 200 pages. But again, poetry books, it's like there's this many words at the top of the page and then the page is empty. Or there's a bunch of pictures in this book or illustrations. So it was actually not like 200 pages. It's quite much less than that. But yeah, this is a book. I don't, again, I'm not a big poetry person, but again, I'd heard of this book enough. I'd heard really good things about it. And I said, let's pick it up and read it. It's, quick enough to get through. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I'm not really, again, already with the whole not necessarily being into poetry that much, but specifically poetry kind of like in this style, which is kind of like a couple word sentences, or like a sentence or two, or just a couple word pieces even, and kind of very choppy in a sense. There are distinct chapters, which helps at least. There are 4 chapters in the book, which is the hurting, the loving, the breaking, and the healing. So I did like how each poem had like an overarching like direction or theme, so to kind of like know what the kind of like everything was going towards, I guess. But I'm not necessarily into the whole kind of choppy, like here's a couple words here and then we turn the page in. It's like a whole new thing. It's kind of like, okay. So sometimes it's hard for me at least to keep up with that, and not keep up with it, but it's just not my style. But, it's another one of those books where you could get through it very quickly if you want to. When I read it over a couple of days, just like reading a couple poems at a time, or just reading like a chapter on a day and then like coming back hours later or the next day, whatever. So I'd say you can do that. There are some good things in here. I could see why it's popular. So yeah, but not necessarily for me, but I wouldn't doubt anybody or, say don't read it. Go ahead if that's your thing. All right. And the 7th book of January 2025 is an American classic. It's called Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The edition I had actually was the 60th anniversary edition. This book was originally published in 1953 as it's a look into a dystopian future in America, essentially. I know many people who have read this book. As I was looking on my Goodreads, seeing like friends who had read this book, this is one of those books that had so many friends on my list who had given it ratings, who had read it before. So I was like, I just missed this in school, I guess, or I'm not sure. But this is Ray Bradbury's seminal work that is remarkably relevant today. We're in a world where information control and mass entertainment overshadow deep thinking often. And this novel, Fahrenheit 451, explores themes of censorship, conformity, and the consequences of an anti-intellectual society. Ring any bells? So this book, like I said, or kind of said, this has been on my to-read list for a while, and kind of thinking again about its relevance today, or thinking about certain books. Like I think of another book that I think is very relevant today is Orwell's 1984. Thinking about books kind of like that, I was like, oh yeah, I want to read this book. I never have. Let me pick it up and read it. So I got through it this final week of January. And it's a great book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's a great book. It's a classic work of American literature and a book everyone should read. It's a really good book. I think it's a really good book to... This is the book I finished earlier today. It's on the 31st of January. It's a good book to end the month on. Again, thinking about with the relevance that it has today, it's like, did Ray Bradbury have like a crystal ball when he was writing this in 1953? I don't know, but it's very, very much the themes in it are I think there's a reason why this is a book that's so long lasting. Definitely a great read though. So yeah, that is the 7 books of January 2025. I talked about all the books here, but if you'd like to see my specific reviews on all of the books, go ahead and check out my Goodreads. I will link it below. It's my name, Aaliyah Langley, so you could search me and add me on there to see my reviews. You also on Goodreads, I try to get a lot of the books on Kindle. I like to have the physical book, but also like I like to have Kindle because with Goodreads of the integration, all of my highlights essentially save. So if I have any highlights or notes from the book, then they're saved to Goodreads, and I could make them visible basically to people to see. So if you want to happen to see some of those things or see some certain quotes, there's a lot of great quotes in a lot of these books. So if you happen to want to check those out, go ahead and get that. If you, like I said, if you want to read my reviews in full, you could read those. Check out other things I'm reading or all types of stuff. So yeah, like I said in the beginning of this video, I take recommendations. I kind of just like have a random reading schedule. Right now I think I might have one book that I have like that I'm basically going to start reading probably tomorrow or something. But other than that, I'm open at this point. I have other books behind me that I've bought but haven't started reading yet, so maybe we'll get to those at some point. I don't know. Most of these I've read, but I have ones here and also ones in my other. I have a bookshelf next to me, and I have another bookshelf out there that I haven't read yet. So I just kind of grab books randomly. So yeah, I'm always open to recommendations. Please send them over. I also specifically, I want to read some like economic text, like a textbook even. I thought about just getting one from the library, but if you have any recommendations on a specific like economics book, I haven't picked up an economics book since like textbook at least since like high school. So yeah, either United States economics or anything economics. I just kind of want to read some more about that. So send me those recommendations in the comments or get in contact with me another way. But yeah, thanks so much for watching the January 2025 books. We look forward to the rest of this year. We're making good progress so far. And I'll see you guys for my next video. Bye-bye.